Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I'm with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. I will be on for technical support and helping to moderate today's session. You can reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions about today's session. Today's topic is about one-stop procurement, and I'm joined by Drew Thomason from KEB. Before Drew kind of introduces himself, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping things. So we are on the Zoom webinar platform, which is a little bit different than Zoom meeting. It does have the same functions. And so you've probably been on this platform before if you've been on a Workforce Wednesday webinar, but you will notice as an attendee that you do not have your microphone or video camera capability. It is a little bit more of a presenter audience type of format for our Workforce Wednesday webinars. We do encourage your participation live, asking questions at the end when we pause for Q&A. You have the capability to raise your hand on your Zoom virtual toolbar, and then I can control unmuting you. So you will have that capability. You can also ask any questions or comments or participate in the chat via today's webinar, and feel free to do that throughout the webinar. And then I'm happy to convey those questions to Drew when we stop for Q&A, or if you have any comments or anything, or need to converse with me via the chat, you should be able to do so. We do have closed captioning on today for accessibility reasons or note-taking purposes. And then today's webinar will be recorded. It will be housed on our Illinois Workforce Academy website, as well as Illinois WorkNet puts the Workforce Wednesday webinars on their website too, under WIO Professional Development. And we will also have the slides available along with the recording. Tomorrow, you will receive a follow-up email from Zoom that will have the URL link to where you can find the recording and the presentation, along with a follow-up survey. We do appreciate your participation on the follow-up survey. I know that it can be tedious to take a follow-up survey, but I personally am the one who reviews all of those surveys and all the feedback from all of our Workforce Wednesday webinars all year long. And I am on the WIO Professional Development Committee, and the committee does look at that feedback. I compile it for them. And so we're able to really see if we're meeting the system where you all are at. So we want to provide professional development that the system needs. There is a question on that survey. If you have a topic in mind that you would really like to have PD on, we as a committee want to provide that for you. So please take that follow-up survey and write that topic on the follow-up survey. And then we would love to be able to find a presenter or someone from our staff or KEB or a different center will be able to provide that PD. With that, I'm going to start us off with our beginning Workforce Wednesday webinar polls. So we first would just like to know where you're joining us from today. So your location, if you're joining us from Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central, Southern, or statewide, if you're out of state. So just where's your local area at? Just so we can get a sense to make sure we're hitting the whole state. We're a very long state, as we know. So we want to make sure this PD is reaching everybody across the state. All right, that's slowing down here, but I'll give it a couple more seconds. It looks like we have about 20% from Chicago. I'll go ahead and end it and share the results. 20% from Chicago, 20% from up Northern Illinois, Central Illinois, we have 33%, 23% from South, and 1% from statewide, which is awesome that you're joining us. Thank you. And then the next question is just which partner do you best represent? I'm expecting a lot of Title I folks on today, but if you represent Title II or III or IV or another WIOA partner or stakeholder, or a state or local workforce innovation board, go ahead and select that. We'll give about 30 seconds for this poll. We do have a couple Title II and III folks on today, which is awesome. Glad you guys are here to get this information. All right. So it looks like we have 52% of you from Title I, a couple people from Title II, a couple people from Title III, and a couple other WIOA partners and stakeholders. So thank you for taking those polls. I do appreciate that. It's for our analytics for the committee. And I will hand it off to Drew. Again, I will be here if anyone needs anything or has any questions. Feel free to reach out to me via the chat.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Drew Thomason. I'm with KEB. I'm here today on behalf of the WIOA Interagency Technical Assistance Team. going to be presenting today about the requirements surrounding one-stop operator agreements, what those agreements need to look like, how you go about procuring a one-stop operator, and addressing any questions that might come up around that. So this isn't technically a poll, but I would love it if you put it in your chat, just if you know what one-stop operator model your local area is using, please enter that in the chat. If you don't know, that's fine. Go ahead and put that in the chat. While you're doing that, just to do some level set, what do we mean as a one-stop operator? Well, the law defines it as one or more entities designated or certified through a competitive process. It must be an entity, whether that's public, private, or a nonprofit, or a consortium of entities. At minimum, includes 3 or more of the required one-stop partners of demonstrated effectiveness in the local workforce area. So I'm just looking through the chat. It looks like we have a lot of consortiums, as well as some single entity nonprofit. So we have kind of 4 objectives or sections to our presentation today. First, we're just going to go over some background about the one-stop operator, and you might see us shorten that to OSO. Then we're going to go, after we go through the background and kind of do some definitions and level setting, talk about the procurement requirements for your one-stop operator. We'll also go over the one-stop operator agreement requirements, as well as the payment provisions for one-stop operators. If you have any questions today, as I'm going through, please you can either put them in the chat, we'll be monitoring that, or you can use the Q&A function in Zoom too. Either way, we will be monitoring that and stopping occasionally to address any questions that might arise. So again, today we're just kind of there's nothing new here. We're just dusting off the WIOA regulations and federal regulations and guidance related to one-stop operators. We want to highlight the requirements and provide resources to you as you consider your local area's next procurement cycle for your one-stop operators. We want to make sure that you can ensure that that procurement process is transparent. It's done in a competitive manner. It highlights the payment terms and how contributions towards those costs will be shared if they are shared amongst the required partners in your area. This is a continuation of how the Interagency Technical Assistance Team is supporting the local workforce boards and required partners in addressing some corrective actions that were required by the U.S. Department of Labor as a result of monitoring several years ago. This is a refresh of a webinar that was presented immediately after that, but it's also just a good time to consider those requirements and best practices, again, as you either prepare for your next round of procurement and agreements or payments for the one-stop operator. Just a quick, Kirsten, it seems like we have the usual spam bot that is in that's asking a bunch of spam questions. If you could go ahead and kick them out, that would be appreciated. So let's go over the one-stop operator background. We'll kind of go over those requirements, some of the prohibited roles, and we'll describe some of those eligible entities. So some background. The basic role of the one-stop operator is to coordinate service delivery of the required one-stop partners and service providers. That's the basic role. Your local workforce board can add additional roles. That could be coordinating service providers across the local workforce system. It could be being the primary provider of services within the center, or coordinating service delivery across multiple centers and access sites within that local workforce area. By law, so this is in the WIOA law, the one-stop operator cannot convene system stakeholders to help develop your local plan, those plans that you recently turned in. The one-stop operator cannot prepare and submit the local plans. The one-stop operator cannot be responsible for oversight of itself. It can't manage or significantly participate in the competitive selection of the one-stop operator for the local area. It cannot select or terminate one-stop operators, career services, or youth providers. It cannot negotiate your local performance accountability measures. And it cannot develop and submit a budget for the local workforce board activities. And as you'll see on these slides as we go through, we try to document kind of where we're pulling these dot points from. So if you want to explore further, we'll have citations for how we came to these conclusions. Again, as Kirsten said, you'll receive this slide deck after the presentation, and if you want to do a deeper dive, you can look up those citations. So now that we've covered what a one-stop operator does, the roles of the one-stop operator, as well as what it cannot do, let's talk about who can be a one-stop operator. So who's eligible? What are the eligible entities to serve as your one-stop operator? That can be government agencies or units. That can include local governments, county governments. It can be employment service state agencies under Wagner-Peiser. It can be educational institutions, so that could be higher ed, area career and technical schools. It could be a community-based organization, a nonprofit, or a workforce intermediary, or other organizations capable of carrying out those duties. So chambers of commerce, a business, a labor organization. It can also be a private or for-profit entity. For-profit entities that serve as the one-stop operator must comply with the federal uniform guidance as a non-federal entity. So some of the highlights for that is that the profit is reasonable and fair. What they're charging for their services is reasonable and fair. That profit is based on efforts and risk needed to achieve the performance goals in the local plan. And during procurement, the local board and bidder must separate amounts intended to pay for the cost from around amounts intended to pay for profit. So you have to delineate the cost, the amount for the costs of services, and then the profit on top. So, and that's that last point there, that the full contract price is the intended cost plus the profit for that for-profit entity. Your local workforce boards are allowed to cap the maximum profit that could be earned per performance result within the approved budget. And the earning of that profit should not be based on the total budget, expending of the budget, or pass-through costs, such as tuition or fixed cost. They require minimal to no effort from the contractor, nor directly achieve the performance goals. And that's laid out in TGOL 1516. And I'll provide a link to that in the chat later today. We'll be referencing that TGOL throughout our session. So I have another question for you. When will your local area conduct its next competitive procurement for a one-stop operator? Is that going to be in this upcoming program year? program year 25, program year 26, program year 27, or you don't know. If you could just put that into the chat. Just wondering where everyone is in their procurement cycle. While you're answering that, I see a question that came in around the consortium and about how the members should be involved in selecting the service provider in the competitive bidding process. Just hold on to that question. We will answer it later in the presentation. So I'm seeing a lot of areas where their procurement is coming up in the next program year. That's great. I see one that is currently in the process and a few that are looking out to PY25 or 26. So this seems like it's going to be an apt webinar for everyone. Fantastic. So let's talk about that procurement. Now that we've laid out kind of the background around who can be a one-stop operator, what the roles of the one-stop operator can be, what the one-stop operator cannot do, let's talk about procurement. So we'll go over the local workforce board's role, the timing, that federal uniform guidance around procurement, as well as conflicts of interest. So again, what you're going to see on your screen right now is taken directly from the law and that federal guidance, the Training and Employment's Guidance Letter, or TEGL 1516. That TEGL was issued in 2017, but is still active. So that is still guiding the guidance around one-stop operator procurement. Part of the thinking around the competition is that it builds in that periodic evaluation of your one-stop operator, which is good. It helps you identify improvements to that process, as well as your one-stop certification process, your service delivery process, and priority or performance metrics. Again, the point here is for continuous improvement. So local workforce boards. Your local workforce board is required to competitively select a one-stop operator, and we'll talk about what that means a little bit later. The local workforce board has to evaluate the one-stop operator's performance. The local workforce board, when selecting that one-stop operator, has to follow its local procurement policies and procedures. And again, it has to comply with that uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, audit requirements for federal awards. So let's talk about that timing. Your one-stop operator has to be competitively selected at least every 4 years. But for whatever reason, if you want to change that cycle to every 2 years, or if you need to procure one for whatever reason within 4 years, you can do that. But you have to do it at least once every 4 years. So I've referenced uniform guidance here a little bit. I want to dive a little bit deeper into kind of how that plays into your procurement requirements. So you have to have written policies, procedures, and timelines for procurement. You have to have a full and open competition with sufficient time to address what is in the RFP for bidders. And you cannot unduly restrict competition. So again, the regulations and requirements really emphasize and require competition. So what are the methods of procurement? You can do a sealed bid through formal advertising. You can do a competitive proposals or RFPs. You can do sole source, but that's a last resort and only when you've tried to do either a sealed bid or a competitive proposal process. And the procurement method depends on the dollar amount threshold set in that uniform guidance and your local procurement policies. Thresholds are for the total amount of the full term of that agreement, since the OSO is a sub-receipt of federal funds. So that threshold is for the, if you do a procurement every 4 years, that's for that full amount over the course of that 4 years. So if a local area, let's say you do an RFP, if a local area only receives one proposal in that RFP, then the local area still has to go through many hoops to get approval to select that one-stop operator as a sole source procurement. So again, sole source procurement is possible, but it causes more administrative burdens, and it is highly discouraged by the Department of Labor. So let's talk about kind of those threshold levels for the different procurement methods. So the micro purchase, your total contract awards up to $10,000. That's the federal threshold. Illinois small purchase threshold are for services up to $100,000 for professional services, and then commodities and services purchased up to $100,000. And when we're talking about the total contract awards, again, that's not an annual amount that you're paying your one-stop operator. That is for the life of the contract. So again, sole source is reason you do have to use that procurement method. Here are some of the criteria around it. Regardless if it's a sole source, it has to be consistent with your local procurement policies. You have to demonstrate that that service is only available from that single source. You have to demonstrate that there's a public emergency for the service that will not permit a delay resulting from a competitive selection process. The federal awarding agency or the pass-through agency expressly authorize that non-competitive proposals in response to a written request. So you have to submit a written request for that sole source procurement. And after you try to go through a number of sources, competition is determined inadequate, whether for reasons of number or the quality of proposals and bids. So this is just demonstrating some of the extra layers that you would have to go through if you have to enter into a sole source procurement. When reviewing proposals, your local boards and the local boards have to evaluate the cost to ensure that A, they're reasonable, B, that they're necessary to perform the duties tasked of that one-stop operator, and that they're allocable. When you're going through this procurement process, you cannot restrict competition. And there are a few key areas that we address when we're talking about that. You can't place unreasonable requirements to qualify. You can't require unnecessary experience and excessive bonding. You can't require non-competitive pricing practices. You can't require non-competitive contracts to consultants that are on retainer. You cannot restrict your competition by organizational conflicts of interest or by any arbitrary action within that process. And we have an example up here on the screen. So the law does require that your one-stop operator be located in the local workforce area. But you can't say that a bidder must be physically located within a specific zip code in that local workforce area. That would restrict competition. So while your RFP or your other procurement document really should and must outline the requirements very clearly, you can't design those requirements to exclude any potential bidders or submitters. I do see that we have some questions coming through. I'm going to answer those once I've gotten through this procurement requirements piece. So I do see those and I will address them. So the individuals involved in the procurement process for the local area cannot have conflicts of interest. They have to disclose any real or apparent conflicts of interest, and they must have a process to recuse a person who discloses a real or apparent conflict of interest. So what is a conflict of interest in your one-stop operator procurement? So here's an example. A person or family member or a partner of one of the people involved in the procurement process would have a financial interest or a personal benefit from that contract being selected. That's an example. More concretely, it's when actions are taken or may appear to be taken by an entity involved in more than one role. The activities of that entity in one role affect its interest in another role, making it difficult to perform that procurement process objectively and impartially. So especially for consortiums, when we're talking about how do you either avoid a conflict of interest or an appearance of a conflict of an interest, the way that some local areas have gone about procuring that consortium as the one-stop operator is having another local workforce area administer that procurement process for them, hiring a consultant to administer that one-stop operator procurement process for them, or looking within the local area to a county official or other government entity unaffiliated with the administration of WIOA in that local area to run that procurement process for them. The Department of Labor is always closely looking at the consortium model. So if you have a consortium of 3 partners, it takes those subject matter experts off the table for the development of an RFP. Or if you have a consortium of your core partners, again, it takes those subject matter experts off the table for the development of that RFP. And we know that local boards can really count on those technical expertise and tasks to administer that formal procurement. So let's talk about a firewall here. The firewall is where policies and procedures demonstrate that the selection process was impartial and it was protected against undue influence. So firewall examples include documented clear separations of duties, documented clear reporting hierarchy, conflict of interest policy, conflict of interest disclosure agreements, and multifunctional agreements. That multifunctional agreement is important when we're talking about the monitoring context. It kind of lays out clearly that these are the things we won't do, these are the things we will do. and there's no questions about roles and duties and responsibilities. Some of the local areas that have or that use a consortium model as their one-stop operator have these multifunctional agreements. And so far that has proven to be acceptable for documenting different roles in terms of monitoring. Just continuing that discussion around the firewalls. People involved in the procurement process must be governed by written standards of conduct that include firewalls, again, to mitigate conflicts of interest. No entity that helps develop an RFP or evaluate proposals can compete in the procurement of the one-stop operator. So again, in the green box, you'll see some examples of where firewalls are essential. When an entity serves in more than one role in the local service delivery system, when an entity serves in more than one role or one function in the procurement process, and when sole source selection occurs. Just have a few more slides around the procurement requirements, and then I'm going to answer these questions. So let's talk about sunshine provisions. So information about the selection and certification of the one-stop operator must be made available to the public on a regular meeting basis. One easy way to do this is through your local board meeting minutes. So that information has to document the decision made and include all the documents in the file to demonstrate the competitive process. The documents listed in the green box on the right are not all inclusive. All documents related to the procurement need to be saved in a file for monitoring purposes. There's a saying in real estate that it's location, location, location. When it comes to procurement, it's document, 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 whether that's either a new procurement or a renewal. Document, document, document. So again, some documents that we would raise up as requirements for transparency, again, not an all-inclusive list, but your local conflict of interest policy, your local procurement policy, your procurement solicitation and any amendments, so the RFP, a list of who submitted bids, an abstract of those proposals, identification of the selected one-stop operator, and the total amount awarded to the one-stop operator. So this is going to be the last slide that I'm going to give on the procurement phase, and then I'll answer the questions that have come in. So there are 5 kind of phases of procurement. You have your planning phase, your release and evaluation phase. Once you've identified your the one-stop operator that you want to procure, you have the negotiation and selection phase, implementation of bringing on that one-stop operator, and the closeout phase. We would recommend that you organize those files that you document according to the phases outlined here and outlined in that Teagle 1516, just so you're positioned well for any future monitoring. All of these phases are described more fully in that Teagle, and like I said here in a little bit, I'll include a link to that Teagle in the chat. That Teagle does state that it is really focused around the one-stop operator, but it uses a similar approach with other procurement, such as service provider contracts or other services. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to, in the public chat, we'll make sure that you get this multiple times, but I'm going to include a link to this Teagle that I've been referencing. And then I'm going to start answering questions. So I had a question. We have one that says, if your one-stop operator is a consortium of the core title partners, does this mean none of these members should be involved in selecting the service provider in the competitive bidding process, or should not be involved in selecting the one-stop operator? That is correct. If your local area utilizes the consortium model, and that is something you're going to continue to do, the consortium, just like every other bidder, needs to respond to the RFP or sealed bid or whatever procurement method you use. They have to, they are treated like any other entity responding or submitting a bid to become your one-stop operator. The next question. If your 4-year one-stop operator contract is within the small purchase threshold, the local area doesn't have to issue a formal RFP to procure a one-stop operator? No, I'm sorry if that was misleading. An RFP or seal bid or some kind of competitive procurement process has to be used to obtain a one-stop operator. And then another question, if I'm following correctly, if we go out for an RFP with a one-stop operator and only receive one response, that would be considered a sole source selection. That is correct. And if you ask a question and you want follow up, go ahead and put that either in the chat or the Q&A if that explanation wasn't enough. And Jody, I see you put in the chat more information around organizational conflicts. Did those slides cover what you were seeking? Great. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions coming through. Can you explain more about the procurement thresholds as it relates to one-stop operator contract? Is that determined by local board policy? It's so there's 3 layers to that. There is the local, there's the local procurement policy. So local procurement policies likely set some kind of threshold. There is the state level threshold, and then there is that federal threshold within uniform guidance. So it has to meet all of those thresholds. I think the technical assistance team's key takeaway is that no matter what process you run or who you select as your one-stop operator, the Department of Labor is looking that you administered a competitive process. So there has to be a sense, you have to demonstrate that you had an open competition to procure your one-stop operator. This is different than WIA or other workforce laws. There's really been a focus on that competitive procurement. Yeah, so if you receive one proposal, you have to go through the process of doing a sole source procurement, which includes seeking written approval from the state. And so again, on that sole source, the best way to document the need for the sole source selection, can I ask a follow-up to that? Do you mean if you've gone through the competitive process, or to skip the competitive process and go um, right to sole source? Yeah, so if you go through the competitive process, you only get one RFP. How do you document that? I think the best way to document that is, again, I'm going to go back here. I would, especially around that list of who submitted bids, an abstract of those proposals, and just demonstrating that you offered, made public, um, made aware that you are administering an RFP or a CO bid. So, including that in your local board minutes, advertising, demonstrating that you attempted to solicit bids, and then you can show that you only got one bid. So just, again, document everything that you do as you go through that process. Kathy, can you elaborate on that question around the RFP Fed cap? And Sydney, yes, the one-stop operator needs to be within your local area. All right, I'm going to go on just for the sake of time. But again, if you have more questions as they come up, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. And also, we will offer ourselves as a resource outside of this webinar. So if you're going through your procurement process and you have further questions, please reach out. Kathy, I'm going to circle back to that here in a little bit, but I want to go through these agreements and the requirements around the agreements. But thank you for following up on that. So there are specific things that are required in your agreement with your competitively procured one-stop operator. And we're going to go through those. So your agreements are going to be between the local board and that one-stop operator. And at a minimum, the one-stop operator agreements must include describing the one-stop operator as a subrecipient of federal funds, your one-stop operator's FIN, that CFDA number and awarding agency, the statement of work, the contract amount over the full term of the agreement. Again, if this is a 4-year agreement, you have to have the contract amount for all 4 years, not just annually. You have to describe the method and frequency of payment to the one-stop operator, the payment process, and the submittal requirements. And what we mean by that is how the one-stop operator, how you require the one-stop operator to let you know that they're seeking payment. Invoices is a great example of that. And then stating that it is a legally binding contract and it has the authorized official signatories on it. So as to address the monitoring findings that the Department of Labor found several years ago, Illinois developed a one-stop operator sample agreement. You're not required to use the agreement, but it does include all of the required elements in in the agreement. We encourage you to use it as a template and then customize it to ensure that it meets any local procurement requirements. During monitoring, the Department of Labor really wants to see evidence that the local board is reviewing the performance of the one-stop operator, and it's not just a perfunctory renewal. And it's the state's position that costs can be provided in cash, non-cash, and in kind, as outlined in other parts of regulations. When doing a review of one-stop operator agreements previously, one of the deficiencies noted was that the cost and payment provisions were not included at all in those agreements. That has to be in your agreement, regardless of what those contributions are, whether they're in cash, non-cash, or in kind. I'm going to real quick, before I move on, I'm going to provide you a link to that one-stop operator agreement. I'm gonna stop sharing my PowerPoint real quick, and I'm going to walk you through that website. So I just put the link into the chat, and it is on the WIOA Works, Illinois Works, and it's under the implementation documents and updates. This is where you find your MOU templates and documents, as well as governor's guidelines supporting documents. It's at the bottom of the page under one-stop operator. And the sample agreement was updated in 2022, and it's available as a Word document here. It's the third dot point. Stop sharing and go back to the PowerPoint. So that's the agreement. Let's talk about payment provisions. And I think a lot of what I'm going to describe here will be familiar to anyone who has been involved in the MOU negotiation and budget development over the past several years. So currently, again, to meet the findings or to address the findings by the U.S. Department of Labor, starting in program year 21, an additional section was added to your MOU template, and that's section 10, as well as specific areas within the MOU budget spreadsheet to address these payment provisions that we were just describing. So again, in MOU section 10, that is the procurement of the one-stop operator, and starting in PY 21, local areas were required to include in their MOU the payment terms and frequencies for the one-stop operator, the total cost of the one-stop operator, which partners are contributing to the one-stop operator cost, and their methods of contribution. This is also updated in your MOU budget spreadsheet, showing annual contributions to the one-stop operator. Here you can just see kind of what that looks like. Again, this is going to be in your shared delivery system cost portion of the annual budget negotiated with your MOU. There's also a separate tab within that MOU budget spreadsheet for detailing these items. I would add that one of the areas that we often see as a finding, an initial finding when reviewing MOUs and MOU budgets, is a forgetting to enter the one-stop operator contract start and end dates. And again, that's not just if you have a 4-year agreement, you need to include the start date and the end date for that full 4-year term. Additionally, in column C, we're looking for the total cost for the full contract period. So if that's a 4-year contract, those costs for the full 4 years. And then column E is the breakout of the cost for the specific budget year described in that budget spreadsheet. All of these numbers should align with your one-stop operator agreement. So when reviewing your negotiated budget, the figures here should be coming from that one-stop operator agreement and should align with that agreement. This is where all partners are sharing in the cost of the one-stop operator agreement, but that is not necessarily always the case. So this is where selected partners, just an example of where selected partners are sharing in the one-stop operator agreement costs. So again, we're kind of at the end of the session today, but this is kind of where, and I'm sorry about the old dates in here, but this is where you would access, I'll walk you through how to access those documents. If you haven't already, I assume everyone has, since we know that everyone is in the process of wrapping up those MOU and budget negotiations. I'm going to share my screen once again and walk you through that website. So again, it's under WIOA implementation. Once page that includes a sample invoice, that sample agreement, and some other documentation supporting the procurement and payment of one-stop operators. As well, you well know this is where you would also get your MOU documents. So once again, I'm going to just pause, ask if there are any questions or anything else that needs addressed. I'm going to go back to the Q&A tab. I'm just looking through the Q&As and I'm going back to some relevant slides. So to answer an earlier question to Kathy, yes, an RFP is for total contracts. An RFP is required by federal thresholds for contracts over $250,000. and that's talking to that specific method of procurement. For contracts smaller, there still needs to be a competitive procurement process, whether that's through an RFP or solicitation of bids or sealed proposals. There needs to be some competitive procurement process in place, some procedures around that that are documented, and that process has to promote competition. I hope that answers that question. And I see one more that I'm going to review. So can I, LaDonna, I'm reading your question. I think I need some clarification on this. So is your one-stop operator agreement a 4-year agreement? I'll follow. I don't see you typing, and that's all right. We'll document this, and I'll make sure to follow up offline with you. Okay, thank you. So her question is that that agreement, as we said, requires the full amount for the she said that the full amount, as we talked about, is required to be in that agreement. However, the local board only approves the one-stop operator for yearly funding based off of their yearly funds. The RFP clearly states that the funding amount per year with the option to renew is based on performance. And she's looking for advice on handling this. I'm going to take this back to the team. I think your answer to my question that it's technically a 1-year agreement with a renewal for up to 3 years covers you. I don't think you would have to change. I think so. I think that the total amount for the life of the agreement is going to be annually, because as you said, they have the local board has the option to renew annually, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to. It's based on performance. So I think, as you said, it's technically a 1-year agreement. So you only need to include the amount for that 1 year. I hope that makes sense. And I see we will pass this on to the team that runs Illinois WorkNet, that the implementation link is no longer listed under We Are Resources. We'll make sure that you can get access to that. Yeah, Jamie, your contract can be for 4 years. That's the max it can be. And then you have to go out and do a competitive procurement process. So you could do a 4-year contract, but within that 4 years, you could not have an option to renew. You have to at least every 4 years run that competitive procurement process. Now you can end up selecting the same one-stop operator again, But the point is that you have to kind of open it up for all bidders that would be interested. Any other questions currently? Again, KEB as well as the technical assistance team are here to answer any follow-up questions. I know when we were looking through the chat, there's going to be quite a number of local areas that are going to be running this one-stop operator agreement in the future. And so if you have questions, please let us know. I'm actually going back to a question. Oh no, we got that one. Okay. So again, my name is Drew Thomason. I'll put my email in the chat for those of you that don't already have it. Please reach out as you start to think about what this process is going to be looking like for you. If you have any questions or need any clarifications around what is allowable and what is required in that competitive procurement process.
Great. Thank you, Drew.
Thanks all.
Just to reiterate for everyone really quickly that the webinar will be recorded and up on Illinois WorkNet and Illinois Workforce Academy website, and that follow-up email with the URL will go out to you all tomorrow. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll go ahead and end us out.